How are we looking? How are we looking? All right, everybody. I'm back from the dead. How are we? Woo. Ironic. All right, good. Yeah. So I beat up the router, so it took a little while, guys. Sorry, the router is very, very slow to come back online. So I rebooted the whole computer and beat up the router, and hopefully now we shall be functional. And I should not be sneezing because I closed my window. For some reason, our backyard wants to make me sneeze in the morning. I'm out there in the evening, no problem. Yes, refresh, I'm back. I return. There we are. Awesome. Yay! Oh, hush. Cornico. You're so funny. Alrighty. So, okay, Cornico. I blame you for turning me on to these little tiny animals because crocheting is much harder than knitting. I just wanted to say that. I am finding knitting a breeze. And crocheting is making me want to grind my teeth into nubs. And they're already nubs. They don't need to be more nub-like. Like, I would much rather knit the tiny animals, but apparently doing that darn circle thing is much easier with crochet. So, yeah. Let's just say that the first effort to knit a magic ring is like, it just kind of looks like if yarn had mucus. Just saying. She is a terrible influence, Quindy. She's awful, isn't she? Yes, awful. So how's the kiddo? Yeah, what about kiddo update? Kiddo update. No, I don't. Maybe it's because I already do so much manual like stuff with my hands. I don't think I'm going to be getting the tendon thing, Cornico, just because I already do. Like I type, like, you know, I'm writing like 1,000 or 2,000 words a day too. So. But yeah, I doubt I'm going to get that because I'm already like usually, also that's usually due to posture, and lately because my shoulder's been so irritated, I've been forcing myself to keep good posture, so I'm like, well, maybe I will. But yeah, if yarn had mucus, like that's what my magic ring circle thing would look like, is a blob of yarn mucus. Just saying. It's terrible. Much better. Yay! Good job, kitty. Did you get painty paws? Is that paint paws? Is that what we call that? Okay, he sounds like he's getting back to himself. So the new meds are working, or he's just feeling better. All right, let's see here. Let's figure out what I want to do today. Some gold and some red is the answer. So let's mix up those colors while we talk about the kitty. Kitty just wants to paint too. With paws. Get our rich leather out here. One drop of that over here. At this point, I can mix NMM gold in my sleep. So, yeah, you clean his feet. He's like, this feels so good. It feels so good to have clean feet. Please clean my feet, mamas. That's funny. I need to make sure I have more lantern yellow. I'm pretty sure I do. But you know, lantern yellow, because I do so much NMM gold. Yeah, we're fine. I had to beat up some electronics, Kodiak. It was all right. You know, like you do. Globs. Globs, everybody. Globs. Yeah, once we have pupster confirmation, like official like numbers, actually once the pupper is actually born and we see that we have like at least a couple girls or at least one girl, then I'm going hardcore into the puppy relearning. The puppy curve. I have a couple of programs I'm studying to try to be even better at puppy raising. Because that's me. Let's just face it. I nerd out on everything. Everything. Yeah, the brats are the ones you do love, though, Critico. My most difficult, most annoying dog that I had when we had 4 Shilohs was the one that I, like, ended up, like, having the strongest bond with compared to, like, you know, Zach, because, like, he was just my dog. I worked with him on his issues all the time. He always thinks he's helping. Yeah. This cat is helping, yes. When you're trying a new pattern. Oh, yeah, exactly. Yep, it's the shoulders. Yep. Yeah, for sure, Twistedoma. Yeah, and shoulder, like, hunching the shoulders can lead to so many issues, like back issues, elbow issues, like arm issues, hand issues. Like, it's ridiculous how important our shoulders are. Same with painting, guys. So try not to, like, hunch over. Try to keep your shoulders back and relaxed if you can. Even if you have to change your chair. And sometimes that helps. But ergonomics in painting and correct posture, like, totally important. Also, frequent breaks. If you know you don't keep frequent posture, set a timer. Set a 30-minute timer and get up and stretch every 30 minutes. You will thank me. Your back will thank me. Your shoulders will thank me. Your brain will thank me. Well, maybe not. Maybe your brain will be cussing at me because, you know, you didn't want to stand up because you were in the middle of a cool part. But sorry. That's funny, Quindy. Yeah, that your cat is reminding you to change the light bulb, no Medzik. That's what's going on. Fun. Kitty cats. They're so cute. Someday I'll have another one. But for now, puppy planning. Much puppy planning. Puppy plotting, dare I say. 1, 2, 3, 4. I told Ron that Derek volunteered to do the award ceremony in my absence, in my probable absence. And so hopefully you guys will get an entertaining Schubert-based award ceremony at ReaperCon this year. Alrighty, so we're going to start. We've got all these blobs, lots of blobs, many blobs. And remember how I like to mix a little bit of one into another. So let's start with white, and I'll go backwards. So a big mixing brush here so I can abuse it. And the next one. And this is 3 drops of pure white plus 1 drop of lantern yellow. Gives us a beautiful pale yellow for a highlight for gold. Yeah, I bet. This one is 3 drops of lantern with 1 drop of rich leather. Give us kind of an ochre color, but it's a little more intense than that. Doesn't have quite the coverage, though, which is kind of why I'm doing this to this, because by mixing a little bit of this into this, we add some pure white, which means it'll cover better. Then we just go straight to the rich leather, but by not rinsing out our brush, we're adding in a little bit more yellow from our previous puddle. I think I need just a tiny bit more water in that. And I'm going to put a little bit more in here too. I'm actually going to add a drop of brown liner to my russet brown before I mix it up. I do that a lot. If you add walnut, it'll really, really take it dark. But if you add brown liner, it'll just darken it a little bit. The black pigment in brown liner is a bit more translucent base, so it doesn't quite like black everything down as quickly as walnut. Alrighty. There's our pentad. Yeah, for drive across the country stuff, I tend to do a lot of audiobooks or podcasts now these days, but that's what I'll be doing, driving the puppy back. I however, have learned that I'm dissatisfied with doing fine handwork when in the car. It's just too bumpy for me. So I read. Or I chat or we listen to audiobooks. Alrighty, now I'm just going to touch up a little bit at the bottom here. And then I'm going to just highlight these guys. Let's get in focus. In focus would be good now that we've got our pen tab. I'm going to bring up again something I brought up in a coaching recently, which is with that when it comes to NMM pen tabs, you are always going to be pretty much the same on your shadow and your highlight. You're going to have something that's very, very dark, and you're going to have pure white. So honestly, walnut brown will work both with silver, steel, and any gold tone metallic. Since I just chose to go a little bit warmer with this time, but you will always be using a very dark color of some sort, either a brown or a gray or something that is a black brown, and you will always be using pure white. So really the only difference in NMM pen tabs is the three middle colors. Oh, yay, cat bed, yeah. Oh no, Kariniko. Yeah, I'm not even there yet. What I'm doing is what I always tell. I'm trying to be the person I advise you all to be. Um, although to be fair, it's really only fun for somebody with my regimented brain. But I'm just doing knit stitch over and over and over and over and over and over and over. Like I'm just doing different swatches with different yarns and different size needles to get my muscle memory locked in. It's kind of the equivalent of like spending some time just lining figures. I want to get the muscle memory of the basic stitch knocked in, and then I'll start working on purls. And some other stitches and stuff, but I just want to start with an easy scarf. So I'm just practicing because I love the yarn that I got for the scarf, and so I don't want to really I want to not mess it up as much as possible. I know I'm going to mess it up, but I want to be confident in my beginner stitches before I begin the scarf. That way, if I mess it up, I know it's not because I went too fast. No, I'm actually good. Or is Twisted, are you talking to Twisted Oma Crowley? I don't like any fiction audiobooks, so I do all informative stuff when I'm driving. And I've got a bunch of writing podcasts and writing YouTube kind of saved up so that I can just put those on in the car. And I have some nonfiction audiobooks as well. All right, so when we're highlighting these little scallopy things, we kind of have to ask ourselves what our strategy is. Technically, it should change as it goes up at an angle. Like the angle that the highlights and shadows would be at would be different. So I would mostly be highlighting, focus on the top. Now, since these are so small, my midtone may be wasted. And this is a thing. You don't necessarily even need a pen tab if you're working on very small areas. You tend to drop out. At that point, you tend to drop out the middle and only bring it in if you find that you need more yellow. And even then, I'm more likely to glaze than to actually reach back for this color. But in a small area, there's a more limited range that you can hit. And so you tend to go for this stuff that's going to show up. And that midtone was just not showing up over the shadows. So I just went up to my highlight and started putting those highlights in. Oh, I do. Remember, guys, I do physical therapy stuff every morning, and that includes hand and wrist stretches. And I do weights. So a little bit of weight training, which I find actually helps a ton. Like the weight training is the single difference maker. Just like basic bicep curls and anything that makes you kind of exercise and get the blood flow going. But yeah, I do some cool wrist circles and backwards hands and things that I find really help. This isn't, I'm, as far as hand abuse, I am not a newbie to this rodeo because, as I mentioned, I've been a writer for years. And so typing all day will do the crazy stuff to you as well. And I've been painting for like, there were times in my life that I miniature painted for 8 hours a day. So yeah, appreciate the feedback because it will help. Certainly, it may help others on the stream. It is a real thing, guys, that you may find you have hand pain or wrist pain when you're doing this hobby a lot, or any hobby. We're talking about knitting, but like anything involving fine motor and doing a lot with your hands where you're fixed in one position can really get you some repetitive stress going on. So be aware and create some tactics. Yeah, that's what I figured, Kernikos, as scarves. Plus, I love scarves because I hate being cold, and so making myself a soft woolly scarf would be wonderful. I have a yarn now that I really want to use, a big yarn, and I've got a little yarn. So I have to decide what scarf pattern. I'm gonna do two, I think. One of them involves purling though, and I'm not there yet. But I want to do a basic scarf, and maybe I'll do the. I'm trying to decide which yarn to use. I've got worsted weight and I've got really bulky. And I've got alternating colors. So switching colors is the next thing I'm going to learn. But yeah, so not to bore everybody with knitting talk, but if you have a very regimented brain, like you like to think things out and you like to kind of like, break things down so you can learn it easier. The way that I'm approaching knitting can also inform the way that you approach miniature painting. I know that with most people, this is not the way that you approach your hobbies. Most people just rush into their hobbies and fall face first onto a giant nest of stuff. And then they go, yay! and make snow angels. That's most people. When I watch people vaulting into the miniatures hobby, this is the tactic most people use. However, I'm right, Quindy. Yeah, the bulky one would be a quicker knit. You're right, Kerniko. Such pretty yarn. It's from a company called Rowan. It's their big wool. And I have a really dark charcoal gray and like a soft, darker, but not like a mid-dark blue. It's just really pretty. I'm so happy. You feel attacked. It is. It's just what people do. And then they get sad because they like are flailing around. We have a guy who came to our paint club who I met at KublaCon. He was in both of my classes. He's a really inquisitive thinker. I can see that he's got a super inquisitive brain because he asks lots of questions. But I can also see that he's a mental butterfly, which is that he isn't concentrating on learning one thing. He's trying to do all the things at once. And this is the recipe for failure. I mean, many of us are attracted to trying to learn all the things at once because we want to learn better, right? Faster. We want to get faster. And we want to get to where we want to be faster so that we can, we imagine, enjoy our hobby more. But in reality, you're going to get a lot more reward if you focus on one thing at a time. So if you can calm your brain down and say, no brain, we're going to have some fun learning this one thing. Even if you only do that once a day, every day maybe you tackle a new thing. That will give you better returns than swapping around during a painting session. So he was like, I need to learn color better. I need to learn blending better. Oh, I need to do this. And then when I gave him the advice, of alternating lights and darks, which honestly would probably help his color a lot, just understanding contrast, he that didn't seem to appeal to him as much. He wanted to learn more advanced color mixing and all this sort of thing. And that's all cool. But then commit to that thing. And if you're going to commit to that thing, understand that your blending is not going to get better while you do that, right? And if you try to do both at once, you're going to get diminishing returns. Even the best multitasky people in the world have to kind of, you'll learn everything, but you'll learn it a lot slower. Yeah, that's beyond me at this point, Twisted Oma. I am trying to be extremely methodical. I have learned that my brain, really loves to chunk tasks down. If I try to, and maybe some of you will find this familiar, as far as since we're talking about learning, you know you have to do a thing. But when you look at, and you know that the thing should be simple, but when you look at the thing, your brain goes into overwhelm mode. You're just like, oh my God, I don't even know, right? So what I've learned is that kind of creating a little map of like, okay, well, first, let's look at the thing. And let's break down, like, what do I need to do to execute the thing? All right, okay, what's the first step there? And if I can just look at the first step, I feel better. Like, I feel like, oh, okay, I can do the first step. Like when I'm doing a coaching for somebody, like when I'm doing my coaching, I'll get this, big long email, and I'll be like, oh my God, and my brain will implode, and I'm like, how do I even do this? But then if I make myself look at the actual questions, just the questions that the person is specifically asking, then I can just break those out. And then looking at each of those questions and just tackling them one at a time makes everything much easier. And it lowers my stress level and my anxiety level, and I can tackle it with more brain, right? So if you are like me and you like kind of things to be in their place and you get overwhelmed easily, then doing kind of a little bit of a breakout on a specific technique, like what do I need to figure out first, would be good. Like maybe you're going to do lining. Maybe you're like, okay, I'm going to try to line. So you know right away that, you're doing it, say, because you need better brush control. So you know right away, okay, so my results aren't going to be perfect. I should probably do this on a bigger model, right? So first thing you would list is, okay, get a bigger model with stuff that I can line. And then you're like, okay, and now I should figure out which brush I'm going to use. So then go and just kind of spend some time with your brushes trying to draw lines and go, okay, this is my best brush for lining. And in this way, next would be maybe paint consistency, working with walnut, working with brown liner. If you break it down like that, you won't be overwhelmed and you'll actually be able to emerge from it with a better understanding of the technique. So I know not everybody has this brain that I've got for breaking stuff down. And if you don't, but if you still find that chunking tasks appeals to you, maybe ask a friend. Or maybe I should do some handouts like that. Maybe I should do a how to chunk down the process of learning lining, for example, for the Patreon. I never really thought about that, but maybe I should. Because I know there are people who like to learn that way, but maybe they don't have the brain that sees the chunks. I don't know. What do you guys think? Yes, and there's my Patreon. For those who are not aware that I have a Patreon, and it's very cool and has a ton of stuff on it at this point, to which we are always adding, because I do like 4 ads a month, because, I want lots of stuff on my Patreon. And now it's been over 3 years. So we got a lot of stuff on the Patreon. Now I'm starting to revisit some things that I did earlier where I feel like I could do better. And how you doing, Bill? All right, I'm going to take some pure white. Notice how I just did the top part of each of these little rings. I'm going to try to hit just a pop of pure white just at the top of each of those little guys. This is a very simplistic way to make things look a little shinier. Even though each of these little loops are made of like little thread of gold, like just, stitched on here, because it is a tiny model, I really can't like do the individual stitches. Okay, I could, but it'd be like mind breaking. Good deal, Agent Marble. Yeah, I'm just thinking that maybe breaking stuff down like into different kind of like learning focused Patreon stuff might be fun. So maybe I should put up how to break down a technique, if you like that sort of thing. And some people, I do know that this is very much a brain thing. Like some people really prefer a more organic learning environment, right? They don't want to necessarily chunk it down. They actually just like to dive in, flail around a bit, and emerge. And usually, one of the things I'm learning, though, and this is definitely a thing that I stumbled into writing lately, is that there's lots of one-size-fits-all approaches out there, and it tends to hit us in painting also. But, like, you'll take a class, or you will, read a lesson or a PDF, or see a video by a really good painter, or in my case, writer. You'll read an audiobook by them or whatever. And you'll be like, oh, wow, I'm really excited. I never thought about doing it this way. And so you'll immediately like start testing that process, right? And maybe you'll be, maybe it doesn't quite work for you, but you're like, oh, maybe I'm just a noob. And so you just keep doing it. But it isn't always that you're a noob. Sometimes it's that you don't have the same kind of like wiring that person does, right? So maybe you would get better returns with a different process. Yeah, and that's a valid learning technique, Kerniko, right? Yeah, and this is key, right? Like just because some way is the way you've always done it doesn't mean that it's the way that's best for you. And so it's like, and as far as best, it really just, the only thing that best defines is, am I learning what I want to learn in the time frame I want to learn in, and is it not frustrating for me? You know, like those are kind of the questions to figure out if the way you're doing it is effective. Like if you jump in and flail around and it's super fun for you and you still get to the goal that you're aiming for, then I'd say your process is fine. Don't fix it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if you're not happy with your progress sometimes, then ask yourself maybe, hey, if I chunked down some of these techniques, you know, would it be better? And I think also it has to do with how experienced you are in your hobby, right? Because like if you're really good at knitting, you're going to have a bunch of tools in your toolbox to learn a new thing pretty easily, even if your learning method isn't totally optimal. Whereas if you're starting a new hobby, that's when you really find out if your process is damaging you or helping you. So yeah. But you know what? A lot of people have that flailing period. I mean, I'm only getting myself together in the last 5 years. Come on, Big Eiler. I was a mess. I was a mess for the first 35, 40 years of my life. Maybe more. What is I think my writing group posted up the Hobbit meme. Have you guys seen that one? Like me as a like 13-year-old reading The Hobbit or reading Lord of the Rings. Oh, hobbits don't consider their kids to be adults until age 34. How funny! Different cultures are so different. And then when you're actually me in my 30s, maybe the hobbits had it right. And then me in my 40s, I think the hobbits were optimistic. That meme. So yeah. Don't be down on yourself. It's a thing. Many of us are not set up to succeed, and we have to figure out our own success over time. And it takes time. And we hate that it takes time. We would like it all handed to us like Amazon. Like, can I just order some like self-control and willpower, please? Two-day delivery? I'm good with that. Yeah, totally, Bill. That's the meme. Yeah. Tension is funky stuff. Tension is almost like paint consistency. Like I love starting a new hobby that's artsy and creative because it lets me draw all these analogies to painting. So I really like that. And writing. All of it. It's all the same, man. It's all got like things in common. It's fascinating. I love watching it, like the interplay and be like, oh, this is this. I'm going to put in a little bit of dark shadow. My paint is I've got a little bit too much on my brush. So when you don't get a very good blended effect, even though you've thinned your paint, you probably just have a little bit too much on your brush. So I need to like get the paint and then I need to rub it off my brush. And then I need to come in and add a little bit of shadow here and there. So, and then I need to add in a little bit of highlight. Now, one thing that you guys are not seeing, and that's partially because, I think it's because there we go. Now we can see a little better. Now you can see the gold a little bit better. Notice against the gray, it is kind of washing it out a bit, but we can work with that. But yeah, if you're interested in getting better at anything, I think it's cool to question your process, even if it's a process you've been using, even if you've been using the flailing around method for most of your life. It may be that you did that because that's what you had at the time, but that actually you would benefit from a slightly more, orderly method if you gave it a whirl. And sometimes if you've been doing stuff painstakingly, but it's just always been really hard for you, maybe jumping in and flailing around is actually a solution for you. So just always be open to, don't get stuck in your ways and think just because I've done this way for so long, it's the way that's best for me. It may not be. We get in these, these kind of like the way we do things. And that's the way our brain ends up like kind of wiring itself. And so in the end, it may indeed be that becomes the best way for you to do a thing. But maybe it's not. So always kind of question. And when somebody's trying to teach you a way to do things, including myself, always question whether, does that sound like it would work for me, right? If you try it and just it doesn't work, not at all, like double check to make sure that you're not missing something. But then if you're not, oh, well, maybe Anne just has a really like anal brain and I don't, that kind of thing. It's okay to be different. A lot of times in mini painting and in educating in general and, things you read on the internet, it's presented as this is the big solution when actually it's really not the big solution. It's just a part of the solution. But human brains tend to really like simplified concepts. So our silly brains. Like, yeah, baking and knitting, USA versus UK. I know, right? Like, luckily my, I think it's both my knitting and my crochet book have a translation of US to UK terms and needle sizes and crazy stuff. All right, so that's not bad. This is like looking kind of shiny. I think it's pretty. It's glittery. It's all good. Over here, though, we've got a shadow right under this bar, so this one won't have a highlight at the top. On these bottom ones, we're going to make the highlight at the middle and at the two tips. So we're going to put a little spot of highlight at the top of each of these bumps, and we're going to try to pick up the feet. We're afraid of the metric system, like I said the other day. All right, so a little bit of a highlight just at the top. You probably don't even have to do the feet. Honestly, just a little highlight at the top with these small shapes may be enough, but we'll see. Alrighty, so that helps pick up those little loops. Yeah, well, she was probably an expert, right, Twistom? I mean, she'd been knitting. She may have even had a thing where she'd been knitting since she was a little girl because they may have knitted their own socks or clothes, right? It is a mess, yeah. As long as everybody speaks the same mess, I think you're okay. It's when people don't speak each other's mess that we get the problems. So a little bit of white on the top of each of those little loops. But yeah, I know for me, and for people probably who are like me, chunking things down, like chunking them into like smaller tasks, feels very satisfying. It also, it definitely feels good. Like it feels really satisfying, and it takes some, if you do tend to feel overwhelmed easily, it takes some of the overwhelm out of that. And just a little bit of highlight down there at the very foot. These are just little tiny touches, right? Like you could make it look good without them, but if I really want this to look shiny, then I want just a little bit at the bottom as well. There, little rings, little happy rings. I need to get this little guy here gold as well. And I can't forget the necklace here either. This necklace is going to be a pain because it's tiny. Oh, Bill, going for the pun award. Yes, may your power stabilize, Shadow Raven. Alrighty, so I'm just going to kind of go in and underpaint with white. Whenever you've got tiny little, oh, I got to switch it. There, much better. Whenever you've got tiny little things like this necklace, where you've got like little rings and these little gems in the middle, it's going to be so much easier to paint if you do the underpainting. This is where you need fine motor control. So with this kind of thing, definitely, like I said, practice your lining, practice stuff that gives you better brush control, so that you can go in and do these sort of things. The other key is very little paint on your brush. And your paint has to be thin to a certain level to come off of the brush easily. And we're going to generalize here because it's really just, even though there's a lot of details that are crammed together, and on digital sculpts, this is the problem, is that there is often a ton of detail that the sculptor can sculpt that the painter just can't see to paint. And so but so what you need to do is simplify. And in this case, it's like I can do the gem and I can do the lower gold or silver loop. So I'm going to underpaint that. The rest of it's going to be kind of in shadow anyway, so I'm just kind of leave that set. As long as I can get the shapes to show up, I'm going to be all right. So you can generalize, you can make shortcuts on some of this little detail. You do not have to hit everything. But you do have to hit enough of the shape for the eye to be able to identify what it is. So that lower rim or edge. But like don't think you have to get into the middle here unless you feel up to it. Because if you try to put that circle around every single little gemstone, everything's so crowded together here, you're probably going to be frustrated. I would be frustrated. I would not be able to do it. Asnabal, I think if anybody's talking to Kuroniko about her weather, she typically has like rain and wind and evil weather, right? Would you call it evil weather, Kuro? Or would it be chaotic neutral weather? Chaotic neutral with a chance of downpour. Although we do have people who live in Arizona who are watching the stream, and so that would be death rays from the sun. Or even SoCal. Now, another thing I should get out at this point, chaotic rainy. Yay! Yeah, Kuro's in Scotland, so they're much wetter than we are, Asnabal. One thing I should get out is a straight up brown liner at this point, guys. For I've noticed that I'm losing some lining, some edge on some of this jewelry. I need to make sure that I can bring out those details, so I'm going to mix up some brown liner. 40-mile-per-hour wind and rain last week in June. Yeah, I thought I remembered that you guys got a lot of wind. I knew you got a lot of rain. I am currently in the blissful, for me, summer months of California, NorCal, Mid-Cal. Everybody calls it NorCal, but we're not really NorCal. We're kind of in the middle of the Cal. So I don't get that. But it's supposed to be 83 today. Which is pretty much perfect for me. MoCal. All right, so now I want to actually bring in a little bit of, make sure I've got some a darker edge on this jewelry on the lower part where it's up next to the skin. I'm using very little paint. I just wanted a little bit more dark there so that when I put in these details, they show up and you can see that little dark rim around everything. So when you're doing that, just paint everything dark first and then go back in with the white. I do kind of miss summer thunderstorms. All right, so again, just a little bit of a bottom edge and the gemstone, which is more than, considering how big you guys are seeing it blown up on the screen. Like when I just look at the model, I'm like, all right, that's good enough. I don't mind that the top here is really in shadow at all because it would be. She's got, you know, big, her head is overhanging that area. So I'm not going to sweat it if I can't reach areas up against there. Just do what you can. Well, but, you know, it would be a multiple redo for me at points in my past too, Grey Wolf. Like, that's the important thing to understand. Like, it's talking just a second about, like, Twisted Oma's grandma who could just look at, like, a knitted tablecloth and reproduce the pattern without a pattern. It's just experience at that point. For me, it's like just years and years of building my fine motor to the point where I can do this sort of thing. Now, if I had not been using a flailing around learning method for most of my existence, I would have gotten better faster. Although I'd say, I don't know how long it would have taken. If I was just focusing on detail, I really wonder how long it would have taken me to develop my fine motor to this point. That's an experiment I can no longer do because I've got it now. And so, you know, now I can't go back and figure out how long it would have taken me. I wish I had that metric because it would be useful for other people and, you know, knowing how long it might take them. But in general, I mean, a lot of it is practice. Like, I think I really only started getting like this fine with my fine detail when I was doing that Soldier 76 statue, guys, because I had to do all that leather texture. And that leather texture was tiny. Even though that was a big statue, I got very, very small with the texture, which is why it took me 140 or 160 hours. And so I think that was kind of the point where I jumped over that barrier and started getting super tiny. And right after that, I did Sacrifice, who had all that fine needlework on her cloth. So then once I realized what I could do, I pushed it even further. But I mean, when you're sitting there doing leather texture for 40 hours and you're just doing repetitive fine dots, repetitive fine lines, like for 40 or 50 hours, you get good at it. Like, you seriously do. Yeah, you're right there, Bill. Sometimes we don't realize how much we flail, how distracted we get. It's very easy. Our world wants to distract us with everything these days, too. Our world would love us to be distracted all the time. There we go. All right, so I've got that mapped out at least. As the ball, when you're just distracted and you're like, I need to learn color, I need to learn brush control, I need to learn eyeballs, I need to learn textures, I want to learn OSL, oh my gosh, I need to learn NMM. That's flailing around. I think I originally described it as like starting a new hobby, getting totally excited, buying a giant pile of stuff, and then falling over into it and doing snow angels. That's flailing. That's how most of us try to learn. Yeah, doing all the things. Like, and it's so like, our culture wants us to do that, right? It's like everybody, and you get so excited. You're just like, yay, brand new hobby. Boom. Yeah. But then you might get frustrated because it's so difficult to make progress at any one thing when you're flailing around. And some people have a very organic learning process where flailing around is, they'll find themselves chunking stuff down, but they'll do it intuitively instead of like actually setting out a plan or sitting down and kind of, charting it out or breaking it down. They want to hit the wall and then figure out why they hit the wall and then respond to that. Like some people have that sort of learning process. That's cool. So flailing does work for some people. But for many of us, flailing has the potential to frustrate us. And I'm all about like trying to help people be less frustrated with the hobby. Because especially if you have kind of a competitive mindset or like a mindset that holds yourself to a very high standard, flailing around can be very counterproductive for you because you expect to see, you expect to see progress and then you don't. Or you see progress, but it's so tiny that you feel like it's not really progress. This is why we tell people to keep their first miniatures if they can at all. And again, this is something that feels right for some people and not for others, which I think is something we don't say. I mean, a lot of people don't really get that reward feeling by kind of seeing how far they've come. They're just impatient and they want to start the next thing. But a lot of us do get encouraged when we see improvement, measurable improvement. And so for those people, it is important to keep your first models because they'll encourage you. If you go back to them and see how far you've come, it's a way to quantify your process and to see that you're actually improving. So it can keep you motivated. How do you not flail? Again, it might be your learning process, but if you're frustrated with flailing, as Nabal, then the best thing to do is to like kind of break down the techniques you want to learn. Like make a list. Just make a list. Okay, what techniques do I really want to learn in painting? Then be like, okay, well, mostly like you could do two things. You could ask yourself what's the most useful? What one technique is going to allow me to do a lot of these other techniques. Or you could just choose the one that seems like most fun to you and just go for it. But just focusing on a single technique and figuring out a model that would let you practice that technique well, that would be a good step. If you're like me, because I'm very regimented mind, I'm very strategic, I'm a planner, I'm a learner, I'm an executor. So for me, making a list and breaking down the technique into like different steps, that really helps me. Because then I can feel like each step is attainable. Each step I can execute on. Yeah. Even more than that, as Nabal. So like, and I don't know how experienced you are in the hobby. I think, didn't you just say you were kind of new? Things like paint consistency. That's a thing to learn. A lot of people don't think about that. But it's like learning and getting a feel for how the paint acts when you thin it to different levels. Because when you do this hobby, you start out using paint pretty much at full strength. But when you work on shading and highlighting techniques, that's when you have to start adding water. And so paint that is mixed to 4-to-1 with paint to water, as opposed to 2-to-1 or 1-to-1, is going to act differently. You're going to want to load it and unload it onto your brush differently. And you may find that different brushes give you better mileage. So, okay, so you have a background in 2D painting, which could, yeah, I think if you've done, have you ever used gouache? Because using the opaque watercolor, gouache, that is what I've heard 2D artists most compare our miniatures to, because we thin everything. And typically when you're working with acrylics on canvas, you don't thin it nearly as much. We're thinning it down almost to watercolor levels to get a lot of the effects that we do on models. And the reason is that as it gets thinner, you can use a smaller brush and the paint will still come off of it, and you can be much more controlled with it. It's hard or impossible to do some of this stuff if you keep your paint really thick. So paint consistency is like one of the foundational things that you want to tackle when you are learning to get better at the hobby. And it's something that people just kind of brush over, I think, because they're like you, they're like, no, just learn to paint faces, and then learn to paint cloth, and then learn to paint metal, and then learn to paint gold, whatever. But in reality, there's a foundational set of mechanical techniques like layering and doing a wash and doing a glaze. And all those things have to do with the right sort of brush and the right paint consistency. So if you walk it back, you get this foundation that then spreads out, and then you get out to these specific topics. So if that makes any sense. So it's almost like you have to kind of keep breaking it down into simpler and simpler things. Because you've got wood, okay? But you try and do wood grain, right? So, but wait, your paint's too thick because your paint isn't coming off of the brush. Or I can't draw straight lines, or I can't draw wood grain. So let's say I can't draw wood grain. Okay, so that has to do with brush control. And the paint isn't coming off brush has to do with brush choice and paint thinness or paint consistency. So you essentially have like this thing, wood, where people are like, this is how to paint wood. But maybe they don't tell you that there are also these other things, like your choice of your brush, the thinness of your paint, and how well you can control your brush that will directly affect how you can do that. So if you break it down to the building blocks and you say, okay, I'm going to work on brush control. And maybe you get a bigger model, but the one that still has a lot of details, and you work on lining and trying to hit all those details. Paint that model, you try to be really precise. That will help work on your brush control. So you are, instead of working on painting wood, you are working on your brush control so you can paint better wood. And this is the same thing with eyeballs. Like, eyeballs are the ultimate example of this. Everybody's like, I need to paint better eyeballs. Okay, first you need to build your brush control. Building brush control lets you do fine detail because you're building your fine motor coordination. Then you still need the right brush and the right paint consistency. So you see what it's coming back to. It keeps coming back to these same, what I'll call foundational techniques, right? Brush control, brush choice, paint consistency. These things, honestly, are everything. So if I was like starting over in this hobby, like those are the things that I would like tell people, like that's the things I would want my younger self to concentrate on. Getting better brush control, learning how to thin my paint and what I can do with that paint, and figuring out what type of brush lends itself to what size of brush actually in this hobby usually. Yep, bye Bill. So like definitely there are foundational like concepts to miniature painting. And some of these you get actually in like disciplines like watercolor painting that you don't get in traditional canvas painting with acrylics, right? Because you just don't thin it to this level. Usually. Some people do. It depends on how you paint on canvas. But on canvas, a lot of the time, part of the joy is texture, which means you're using very thick paint. So this is a bit of a different beast. And that's why people who have done gouache, have done opaque watercolor, like they're like, oh, this is like that. Because they realize we're using watercolor brushes. Because all of the best brushes for miniature painting are watercolor sables that were meant originally for watercolor. And we're thinning down our paint to a very fluid consistency so that we can have better control. Yes, and that is true. You can do a specific thing like Valandar says, where if you want to get better at eyeballs, you can get the faceless horror model, which is almost all eyeballs of different sizes, and you can just specifically practice eyeballs. And practicing eyeballs will make you get this, and then you will find suddenly that you can do belt buckles really well. And you're like, but I just practice eyeballs. But it doesn't matter because the foundational techniques underneath eyeballs that enable you to do a good eyeball also enable you to paint a beautiful belt buckle or a fine filigreed piece of cloth or jewelry. Yeah, well, letting you know, Asnabal, the brushes that are best for miniature painting are generally sables, usually the highest grade of sable, which is Kolinsky. Highest 2 grades. These are mostly watercolor brushes. They're mostly in the size of size 0, size 1, size 00. The lowest number I'll usually use is a 50, but that's only in certain brands. Synthetic brushes are a thing in this hobby, but they aren't quite as good. But a lot of the best kinds, like this is a Master's Touch. And so the shape is important. It won't hold as good of a tip as the Kolinsky, but as you can see, it holds a decent tip. It's starting to hook a bit. And that's the problem with the synthetics. They will wear a lot faster. If you get a good Kolinsky sable, you can beat it up for years, and it's still going to hold like a razor tip. But like this kind of brush is what I tend to use. Now, there are miniature painters out there that are going to tell you to use a bigger brush. And those painters are typically working with thicker paint on a wet palette. But they're still using sables. So this is a Raphael. And then the one I tend to go to is Da Vinci, although it's rubbed off of the barrel on this particular one. Where's my other Da Vinci? Ah, that's a Raphael. Ah, there we go. There's my fresh Da Vinci. Da Vinci Maestro. Series 10, size 1 is my go-to brush for everything, pretty much. And some brushes are going to be shorter and thicker, as you know. But we're always working with sable or a really good synthetic that's kind of a trying to be a sable. So we don't really use a lot of the other brushes. We do use different shapes, especially when working with bigger areas. Like if I'm doing scenery or a base or rocks or something, I'll use a flat. Or a rounded filbert, depending on what I'm working on. But a lot of people don't use the other brush shapes. Mostly because if you're trying to do this size of mini, a round will do a lot of what you need. But if you're working on bigger stuff, like if you're working on... her hat is balanced on her. So if you're working on a bust, which is big, busts would allow you to maybe vary it up and play a little bit more, although I still tend to mostly use a round for this. So that's our bust that we've been working on. Smaller brushes are not needed as long as you have a brush with a good point, Spaz. However, when you are thinning your paint a lot, like a 2-to-1 down to 1-to-1 or more, you will find that if you use a bigger brush, even if it has a good point, like if I was using this Reaper, it still has a good point. But what will happen is I'll have to unload my brush a lot more to use it. So with really thin paint, it's just going to take me longer to unload my brush to the point where I can get a really fine line out of it. And the reason is just that there's a lot of fluid in here. And look at it. It wicks all the way up. That's the other thing is it's really gotten up. When you've got a brush with a wide belly like that, it tends to slurp up all that nice fluid. And then you actually end up having to clean it a little more. Whereas if I'm using a very long, thin brush, I can just tip a little bit. It takes me much less time to unload it to get that same super thin line. So a smaller brush, if you're having trouble with having to unload your brush a ton, switch to a smaller brush for fine detail. Does that make sense? But I mean, when it comes down to it, I can do eyeballs with my big Raphael. Like, this is totally, absolutely, like, and considering my original brush that I was using. With this guy on the right, I could totally do eyeballs with this. The point's the same. In fact, if you go and you just kind of cover everything up, you see that they're almost identical. Like you pretend they're the same length. But I like long, thin brushes because I like thinner paint. If you are working with thicker paint on a model, like say you're using a wet palette and you're only dealing with the water that you're kind of having wick up into the paint, and otherwise you're not thinning that much, then you're going to maybe get more mileage out of a bigger brush. It's all different. So yeah, woo, technical stuff. Woohoo! All right, where were we? Oh yeah, we were trying to figure out, I was doing the gold on this little sucker. This brush is so worn down. Like it's a hair away from being dead. It's just thinned down forever, but I keep using it because it's still usable. Yeah, that's cool. Eyes, if you really love doing eyes, try doing, then busts may be more rewarding for you because you can only do a very tiny eyeball on these little 28s. Very tiny. So sometimes if because I do like painting eyes a lot, and I like doing larger models for that reason. For many reasons, but that's one of them. Yeah, they're long and thin, right? Yeah, I like that shape for everything, but yeah, they do excel at tiny lines, Vithio. Absolutely. Glad you like them. It's nice to experiment between what I would call it the 8408 being a pointed round and the 8404 being a full belly round. The only full belly one I've got is my Giganto brush, but you can see how fat it is. It's very fat, and its tip like doesn't have as long of a taper. It's very fat. So this I use for a totally different set of things. Using this brush with really thin paint would be a super mistake. You would be unloading that brush forever in order to get a nice tiny detail. Cool, Spaz. I'm glad you like them. They are my favorite brush brand. I need to add a little bit of water to this paint. And because I like using thinner paint is why I use a well palette 99% of the time. I've even taken using a well palette for my oils, believe it or not. It's kind of crazy, I know. But you find the right tool for you. All right, so we want a little bit of a highlight down in the bottom, and then we want much stronger highlights at the top and around the edge. Oh, we're in Mexico, Warshadow. We were just in Puerto Vallarta in December, of course. We enjoyed it. Oh, cool. Wet palette or well palette. Okay, so well palette, traditional porcelain. This. I like this one because the wells are much smaller, which means that if I use just a little bit of paint and water in each of these wells, it still exposes less surface area, so the paint essentially stays wet for longer. The other type of palette people use as Nabal is a wet palette, which is a container with water in it with a sponge and a piece of parchment or other permeable paper on top of the wet sponge. You can also do a really cheap one by using wet paper towels and just some baker's parchment paper. That's the cheapo version of the wet palette. The point of the wet palette is that it's going to keep your acrylic paint wet longer by wicking water up through the paper out of the sponge. And so it's not going to let your paint dry. Downside, you really can't control your paint consistency. You kind of have to wing it. And the longer your paint sits on the palette, the more water wicks up into it until it kind of is a mess. If you need coverage or thicker paint, you're kind of starting over. Oh yeah, I've been using this for oils. But I'm using oils for miniature painting. Oh, that's right. I told you guys I was going to show you my not safe for work model, but I was going to cover up all the bits to show you my oils. I just started using oils for miniature painting, just for fun. Okay, let me put a bikini on this model. I was going to put a blue stuff bikini on her, because it's just easier that way. Oh, it's changed a lot since those days, Valandar. Yeah, I have Winsor & Newton for the most part with oils, but a lot of miniatures companies have started creating oil paints for miniatures. Scale 75 is the one I picked up their paints because I wanted a little bit more. Hold on, bikini is in form here. Fig leaf. Sadly, blue tack, I just can't create a fig leaf. Sorry. Y'all are just going to have to, imagine I'm a better sculptor than I am. There. I have covered up my naked dragon lady. Okay, so this is the model I'm painting with oils. She's very large. So I'm just playing around. This is just my playing around model. And you can see the sheen. I'm getting the shinies. I need to wait for it to dry and then do a lacquer on it if I want it to be dull, like I wanted the rest of this to be dull. But you can see the sheen. You can also see the pretty gradations, though. All the purples inside of the browns, which is really pretty and fun to do with oils. And then the turquoise skin, yeah. So playing around. But she's really cool. She's a dragon lady. She's got a dagger that's actually on fire down here, so that's why there's all this white right here. So will be a lighting effect. But she is definitely naked, so she is not safe for work. But that is what I've been doing. And yeah, so I just actually pick up, because I only need a tiny bit of oil paint for something that's small, I will use just a little spatula, a tiny spatch. One of my sculpting tools usually, so something like this. And I'll just scoop a tiny bit of oil paint, put it in here, add solvent, or whatever medium I'm using, and just mix it up. And that way I just take a shop towel and just wipe out the well afterwards, and I'm using just a minuscule amount of paint. So even though I have real palettes, I have a glass palette, and I've got a traditional wooden palette that I've treated as well. With linseed oil, I've actually found that I'm using my well palette for oil, just because I use such a small amount at a time. And because I'm loading solvent into it, because I like that consistency a little bit better for these miniatures, it's going to dry faster. So I want to take it out of the palette. It's not like I can just leave it on the palette. So oils are like being able to wet blend for a long time. Oh, but just for fun is often some of your best work, though, Kuro. Isn't that true in knitting? A project you started just for fun, just for me, just for you, just because, turns out to be one of the best things you've done. I find that's very true in art. Because then we relax and we just have fun and it turns out really well. So yeah, so it took a long time for me because I used oils. Actually, you should know, those of you who don't know, I did go to college for art, and so I did start out as, somebody who drew, somebody who painted like on paper and canvas. So I did come from that world, but I haven't used oils in 30 years. So this is like, I remember using it, but this is pretty much also relearning it. And yeah, I went with that. I got the citrus stuff, Twisted Oma, but the citrus stuff actually makes my head hurt. Like, the scent is so strong. If I was painting outside, like if I did any plein air, I think I would totally do the citrus solvent, because I like that it's more of a, it's a little less of a horrible petroleum distillate. But I am using the odorless now, just a little bit at a time. Like cat hairs. Cat hats. Yeah, cat hats. I love your cat hats and your cat scarves. But yeah, so I've got a tiny bottle of odorless thinner, and then I've got a big Gamsol thing that I can refill it with. But I do find that, just like with mini painting, I use very little paint in my palette at a time, and I just like clean it up after every session. And I am finding that I do like to thin it quite a bit. It makes it more, maybe because it makes it more like miniature paint, like the paint consistency I'm used to working with, and so I'm just better that way. I don't know. Yeah, I hate turpentine. That's kind of why I quit oils, actually, as Nabal, because way back when I was in school in the dark ages, nobody knew that turpentine was bad and you shouldn't be breathing it all the time. I would just get headaches in class. It'd just be bad. And nobody, we had no ventilation. So I decided that if I never had to smell turpentine again, it would be too soon. And I just stepped away from oils completely. And then I, got into miniature painting around that same time. And then I ended up making it my career. And I just, because oils have gotten more and more into the consciousness, the public consciousness in mini painting just within the last 5 years or so, I decided, what the heck, I'll give it a try. But I refuse to use like turpenoid or turpentine. Like, I need to find a solvent that will not hurt me. So I thought the orange stuff the citrus solvent was going to be the answer, but then it turned out that the scent was so strong that it actually was just the same. All right, orange and black yarn for Halloween cat hats. Yay! That's awesome. But yeah, so the solvent that I did land on eventually wasn't a odorless thinner, which isn't truly odorless, but is close enough not to make my head hurt, it seems. I painted with it for about 3 hours on Sunday when our paint club was over, and I didn't have a problem. So that's we did have good ventilation though. Yeah, it's the one that I ordered. The one that I got originally, my little bottle, is actually from, I think, Scale 75. I don't remember the brand, but Gamsol odorless is probably the best one just per like artist reviews, and I'm refilling my bottle with that one. So what's do you just can't deal the scent, or what are you trying to troubleshoot specifically, Asnabal? His black bat wings. So you can have a winged bat kitty for a dragon cat for Halloween. Is that what Loki, or the other one? The other one is the one who likes the costumes, right? A winged dragon kitty for Halloween. Pictures, or it doesn't happen. All right, so let's just get a few more highlights onto some of this gold work. And then I will actually come in and try to like do a bit of a base on the necklace as well. Where poison control. Okay, so if you're looking for something that's actually biodegradable and actually naturally sourced and the smell doesn't bother you, then I would look into citrus solvents like the one that I got, the orange. I think it's from like Milk Company or something. Weird milk paint. But there are a couple of citrus. I think Zest-It is one of them, but they're essentially solvents that were created just from citrus oil, and so or citrus like derivatives. So it's a very natural product, which is why I was drawn to it. But really strong smells really give me a headache, so I had to back off from that one. I may try to use a mix and see, but I don't know that that's a smart idea. But I believe that the citrus one is the one that's really good for the environment. Do your own research, but when I was researching, that's how I was drawn to it. I don't think so. You gave us the St. Patrick's kitty. Because I think that's when I maybe he did way back like last year and I missed it. I could have missed the wing. I don't think I would have missed the wing kitty though. I can't believe that. Milk paint. Yeah, milk paint makes a citrus thinner. That it did work fine with my oil paint. It just the smell was too much for me. Well, okay, so keep in mind that art products and industrial paint products are very similar beasts. If you did not know, I actually created Reaper's paint line. So I'm the one who created Master Series Paint. I had to learn a bit of paint chemistry to do it, and I've talked with paint chemists a lot over the years of doing it. And what I have learned pretty much is that everybody steals from everybody else. So the textile industry steals from, the art industry steals from textile and industrial industries. The industrial industry steals from the textile industry. Everybody steals from everybody else. So a technology that works on one does have a high chance, although you have to do your research, but it does have a high chance of working in the other. They're not separate. Like, I never think of them as separate industries. Like, I will tell you that, like, one of the companies that Reaper had worked with over the years is very much a house paint company. Like, but they do all sorts of coatings and surfaces and stuff. But it's like paint is paint is paint. At least in the acrylic water-based arena. It's a little bit more dicey when you get into solvents, but nonetheless, not surprising that a company that does stuff for decks and ceiling would also do a product that's usable with oil paint. So yeah, everybody steals from everybody else. I mean, all the acrylic inks that are being used in graphics and in mini painting nowadays are just dyes that were originally created, or compounds that were originally created because the textile industry wanted to stop using dyes. They wanted something that clung like a dye but was permanent like a paint, like that would age more like a pigment. And so that's why acrylic inks were created for use in textiles. And then the art industry just stole that tech, because it's like there's just so much interplay between industrial, art, and textile. Like there's huge, like, I swear they all like get together at a big conference somewhere. Everybody shares ideas. Oh, he loves the wings. That's funny. Oh, mini time check. Yeah, we had a late start. I don't want to go too late, but yeah, I noticed a few minutes back that it was a bit after. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit this white highlight on this guy, and then I'm going to go up to the necklace and at least put some gold around those little edges. Your cat is so weird, Kerniko. I mean, I'm glad you have a weird cat because it allows you to do things like knit wings for him. But man. Oh, I have an errant hair. We love making a lesson out of having an errant hair. Do I have my knife? I do. So the safe way to do hair surgery. I have a tiny hair that is sticking out from the side of my brush. We're going to capture it with our knife. We're going to gently pull it away. Do you see it? It's really hard to see. But you can kind of see it. There, you can see it right there. There. So take that all the way down to the bottom, and then kind of snick it off. Just use your knife right against the top of the ferrule and just snick it off. And then you have a perfect brush again. And by doing this, you are not disrupting the build of the bristles inside the ferrule. So how the brush was actually constructed. I used to use inks a lot, Major, but I stopped because back when I was starting mini painting was when I used them, and then they were actually still dyes. And some artist inks still are dyes. Like I think some of the Winsor & Newton inks are still dyes. But there are also now acrylic inks, which more people are going to, which are not a lacquer base. And those are actually just paint. They're just using some different technologies. Hello, Katsu. Yeah, we're about to end the stream, but I'm going to try to at least get some of the gold painted on these little rings. We're using our rich leather to get that down. So just blocking in a bit of gold. I'm going to leave the gemstones white for now. They will probably be red. But yeah, I stopped using inks because I didn't like the fact that they would reactivate and bleed. And now I just find that I don't reach for them as part of my painting process. But my boyfriend, who's a crystal brush winning, which is a very high level award winning painter, he likes to use them to glaze and increase the saturation of colors. Because they tend to be a bit more transparent than paint. They're usually at the right consistency for doing that. So, yeah, the acrylic inks are good for really intensifying color with glazes. They do tend to be naturally translucent because they use superfine pigment. So they're good for that. There we go. So we've got the gold kind of mapped in on the necklace. I'm going to hit the very back a little bit there. And the other side. There. But yeah, so that's what acrylic inks are useful for, is if you want to intensify color and you want to do a glaze. I would still thin them a bit. I wouldn't use them full strength. They are pretty strong. I bought some to mess around with them. One thing I don't like is that sometimes they're not matte, but as long as it's an acrylic ink, you should be able to use our anti-shine additive to fix that. A regular ink, I would not, like a traditional dye, the anti-shine additive, I don't think would work. Different beast. All right. Just a little bit of finish work on all of that. I mean, you could mix them and then do a glaze, but yeah, it's not to do the basic painting. I don't think I would do the basic painting with acrylic inks. Because it's just not high coverage enough. There are better tools for that job. But they do work fine over the top of paint. There we go. Coming along. Didn't quite get to the earrings. Didn't quite get to... If we would have had our full hour and a half, we could have probably gotten the earrings and highlights on the necklace. But she's coming along. Now that we're slowing down and doing all this freehand, you notice it does take a lot more time to do the freehand, but then even to highlight and shade the freehand, it took us quite a bit of time to do doing little details is a painstaking thing, especially when you have to kind of stop and fix it and then go back and, you know, all of that. And we haven't even touched what we want to do on the back of her yet. This is a very simple blank canvas right now. And we also haven't tackled the white. So maybe next time we paint her, I'll start tackling the white down here, shading and highlighting it, since just take a break from the freehand and stuff for a little bit. So, all right, folks, that's it. We do, of course, do this every day, every weekday anyway, so we will be back tomorrow. Just as a reminder, everybody, I will be out on Thursday and Friday, so we will not have this stream Thursday and Friday. I'm going up to back to Wisconsin to visit my family because my niece is graduating. So, yes. Sorry we started late. Sorry for the internet. The internet was just fighting us. And tomorrow is bust day, so we will actually... Although I'll tell you, I just ordered some models, or I'm about to order some models to replace the bust with monsters. I'm not going to tell you what, because it's going to be a surprise. And so, yeah, we're going to work on the bust tomorrow, probably because I got the feathers kind of figured out. We'll work more on the white, bringing the white up. That is what I think we will do. She's looking pretty good. She's looking pretty good. 50-50 on the crow's nest. Yeah. Cool. All right, folks. I hope you all have a lovely Tuesday. Welcome to Asnaball. I hope you have fun with the hobby. Hope you hang out, and if you have any questions, feel free to come back. This stream really is about answering questions. So even though I paint things on it, I can always be convinced to elucidate and answer questions. So if you need help, just come on over, ask a question, no problem. So there we go. All right. Bust is going to take you a whole year. It's big. It's big. All right, everybody, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.